not messy if I just like did out the window?
No, that would be disgusting. It would be everywhere.
That's our daughter. Nice. Daughter got a hold of it. You're barely in it, but okay. Well, it's on the ground now. like that.
I ain't much of a poet, but I know somebody once told me to seize the moment and don't squander it. Cause you never know when it all could be over tomorrow, so I keep conjuring. Sometimes I wonder when these thoughts Cause I needed an invention, this TNFD between me and this monster. Save me from myself and all this. Cause of everything that I love killing me and I can't do it.
I know.
Me in the head, keep knocking, nobody's home. I'm sleeping.
You don't have to apologize every time you hit a bump.
I didn't apologize. I'm just telling you that I can do it. Wow, just fucking wow. Like, I'm not mad at him. I'm not mad at him. Stupid white horse are fucking going.
land. I'll send you off to walking school, then you'll be nobody's fool. You might take your place among the best. $35 dinner, $40 will they give me 40, make it 40 minutes on the $40 will they give me 40, the $40 bill. $40 dinner now, 45 will they give me 45, make it 45 minutes, 45 to the dinner and the $45 bill. So from that boy who went to school, there grew a man who played in school. They came back home a full fledged dog.
Yeah, no.
And the people came from miles around to hear that rhythmic sound that filled their hearts with such a happy cheer. His name spread out from shore to shore. He had all he could do and more. Had to buy a plane to get around. Now he's the top in all the land. Let's all give that man a hand. He's the best of all the all county here. $45 dinner, now $50, $50 will they give me 50, make it 50, $50 will they give me 50, $50 bill. $50 dinner now, 55 will they give me 55, make it 55, $55 sold and on for the $50 bill. Hey, well I'll let you open the gate and let him out and walk home. Here we come out of number 29 in, what are you gonna give for? I'm 25 to give 30 now, 5 to pop another $40 on me.
In Dolly we trust. I need that sticker. Or I need to make that sticker.
I like that song. It's fun.
Yeah. Put some Seamus Kennedy on.
Huh?
So put some Seamus Kennedy on. See, I wonder if
Very loud.
that's not gonna work. See, I wish I could just twist this off and like somehow. Be too wobbly up there.
There are 2,700 robocalls made every second in the U.S. You might have been on the receiving end of one.
You know, when you left East Fork Consolidated High School or East Fork Baptist Church, you had to go through a little swamp. And in that swamp, the older people had told us that there was a man down there that didn't have no hate. So anytime we was walking through there, I'm talking about when I turned that curve in the road, my vest pocket would dip up sand when I come round through there. Me and my brother Sonny was playing baseball down in a pasture, and we let dogs slip up on us. We had to go across that bridge down there where that headless man was. We was on a horse named Topsy. Sonny didn't have on no hat, but I had on an old baseball cap. He said, man, get ready, I'm fixing to hit that bridge running wide open where that headless man can't get us. Well, I turned my cap around, put it on real good where it wouldn't blow off, and I held it around Sonny's waist. And he said, lookity, here we went. And just as we got to that bridge, he took out and said, ha! And she made a lunge forward, and it threw my head back, and the bill of that cap stuck me between the shoulder blades. Sonny, he's got me! He's got me, he's got me. And we run up in the front yard, and I'm screaming. My mama come running out, and I said, the headless man grabbed me back of my neck. My mama said, son, you know mama don't believe that. I said, mama, he grabbed me right back to him. And I put my head back in the bill of that cap stuck me. And if that hadn't happened, that Sunday morning, I said, man's fine. I church this Sunday morning, I said, man's fine. I church and Sunday school with my family. You know, I got to thinking, I said, this will be an excellent weekend to take my preacher to see the Grand Ole Opry. Oh, I went out to the church and I said, I want you to fly up to Nashville with me. I'll have you back in plenty of time to preach Sunday morning. He said, Jerry, I ain't flying in no airplane. I said, Brother Yates, you mean to tell me that I sit out in the congregation and you get up and preach about if God be for you, who can be against you? And you quote from the book of Ephesians, give thanks for all things, and you talk about faith, and you scared to fly in an airplane? I'm ashamed of you. And Brother Yates said, Jerry, the Bible says, lo, I am with you always.
Oh, whoa.
Me and Marcel had been hunting all the morning one morning. We had just got our discharge from the Navy. Money was a little more plentiful, but we didn't have too much of it. We stopped by the country store and we just had a dime between us. Marcel told the storekeeper, Mr. Duval Scott, said, I want a nickel's worth of soda crackers and a nickel's worth of cheese.
Wow.
He said, we don't sell no 5 cents worth of cheese. We don't sell nothing under a dime's worth. Marcel said, well, I'll take a dime's worth then. And he whacked.
Okay.
No, it's still fucking playing. It's done that to me before. I don't understand.
Yes! Simply Guitar is the best app for complete beginners. This was my life before I got it.
I rode a school bus that didn't have no windows in it. Had a canvas that you rolled up and down. There are other lands that I could have been birthed in, and I would have been born into a certain class before I would have even had the opportunity to participate in show business. But not in America. If you got the backbone and the determination and you want to get it on, you can get it on. Ain't that wonderful? Listen to this. The house I live in, the friends that I have found, the folks beyond the railroad, and the people all around. The worker and the farmer, the sailor on the sea, the folks what built this country, that's America to me. The house I live in, my neighbors, white and black, the people who just come here are from generations back. The town hall and the soapbox, the torch of liberty, a home for all God's children. That's America to me. What about the words of old Abe Lincoln, of Jefferson and Payne, of Washington and Jackson, and the task that still remains?
Is this like a funny
The
one
little
or
bridge
them
in
just
Concord.
preaching?
Our Gettysburg and Midway and the story of Bataan, the house I live in, the goodness everywhere, a land of wealth and beauty with enough for all to share, a house that we call freedom, the home of liberty, and a promise for tomorrow. Oh, praise God, that's America to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Marcel Ledbetter's favorite friend, Uncle Versy's favorite nephew, and Mississippi's favorite son, Jerry Clower.
Good gracious alive. I some kind of something or another love every one of you. I don't know of any place I had rather be than right here. And for me to do a show at Mississippi State University is just like throwing a rabbit in a briar patch. Because I have been here before. I played football at Mississippi State University back in, And I remember back in the spring of '49, we had 13 weeks of spring training. There was a lot of walk-ons, and every Saturday at the big scrimmage, we did the best we could to hold our position because there's so many walking on going out for football. I was on my plate and give it to one of them. So I was putting out all I could, and one day a fella walked up. His name was Titus Plummer Rice, and he was from up in New England. And that was the runningest thing I have ever seen in all my life. He would reverse the field sometimes just to show us how he could run through us, just getting it. Oh! They pitched the ball to him one time on a quick pitch, and I was playing left defensive tackle. And I busted through and got him around the waist and commenced to squeezing him and was going to take him down to the ground. And about that time he wiggled and went straight up in the air, come down in my back and stomped.
Why does he keep doing that? I'll do it differently, I guess. It might just be this video.
It's stupid and irresponsible not to claim the free $6,400 subsidy from the government. Let me explain. So they just passed the
it's not giving me the fucking option.
giving $6,400 to all Americans under 65 that are not on Medicare or Medicaid.
I'm not listening to that dumb shit.
First of all, I want
What's
you
your
to know
language?
that I come from Route
I know.
Liberty,
No.
Mississippi. Now that's
I told you
12
before we started,
miles
when you
west
told me
of
that you wouldn't do that,
Mississippi.
you know, I
65
swear.
miles due northeast of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and 116 miles due north of New Orleans, Louisiana. It was there that I first saw the light of day out in Aiken County, September the 28th, 1926. I was born there. Now, as I grew up in that community, the only extracurricular activities that we engaged in was to go coon hunting or go to revival meeting if we had a crop laid by. And that's all we did except work. And this particular day that I want to tell you about is one evening when we were going coon hunting. We had a pack of hounds. When we'd get some ground for just regular, for human consumption. This particular day we wasn't too busy. All we had done is just cut down a few fence rows, shut and shell some corn and went to mill, drew up some water because that was wash day, helped get this sow back what rooted out from under the net wire fence, sharpened 2 sticks of stovewood real sharp and pegged them down over the bottom wire of the fence where the hog couldn't root out no more, and had a rat killing. If I'm lying, I'm dying. We had rat killings in those days. Well, this particular day after we got through the rat killing, I walked out on the front porch and I hollered. and them dogs come out on the house barking. They knew we was going coon hunting. And I hollered again, and my neighbor way across the sage patch hollered back, and that meant I'll meet you halfway. We met in the middle of that sage patch, and he had his dogs, old Brummy and Queen and Spot, and I had Tory and Little Red and old Trailer. And we went out into the swamps, and we started hunting. Oh, we was having such a fine time. Caught 4 great big ones. I heard a racket, and it scared me, and I hooked my carbide light, what I had wired to my cat, around there, and I was looking in the vicinity of where I heard the racket coming from. And the beam of light hit a man right in the face, and it lacked him till it scared me slapped to death because we was hunting on this man's place. I said, Mr. Barron, is that you? He said, yes, Jerry. What are y'all doing? We hunting. How many have you caught? 4 great big ones. He said, well, boys, glad to see you. Y'all want to spend the rest of the evening hunting with me and John? Well, I looked, and lo and behold, there was John Eubanks, a man that lived on Mr. Barron's place. John Eubanks was a great American. He was a professional tree climber. He didn't believe, I'm telling you the truth, he didn't believe in shooting no coon out of no tree. It was against his upbringing. He taught us from birth, from the day we were born till the age we could keep listening to it. Give everything a sporting chance. Whatever you do, give it a sporting chance. He'd have been a great conservationist today if he'd be here. And John said, take a crosscut saw, coon hunt with me. When you tree a coon, hold the dogs and cut the tree down. Or either climb the tree and make the coon jump in amongst the dogs. Give him a sporting chance. A lot of times we climb a tree and make a coon jump in amongst 20 dogs, but at least he had the option of whooping all them dogs and walking off if he wanted to. This is strictly left up to the coon. So I said, Mr. Barron, we'd be glad to go hunting with you. You know, he was a rich man. He had sold a lot of cotton during the First World War for $1 a pound. He had some world-renowned dogs. And we hollered 3 or 4 times, and they started hunting. We listened, and directly, old Brummy didn't bark at nothing but a coon. He had a deep voice. He cut out on it. It was a coon. Don't worry about no possum or no bobcat. Brummy was running a coon. And then old Trailer and old Highball and them famous dogs that Mr. Barron's got in there with him, and old John Eubanks holler, hey, speak to him. And my brother Sonny holler, hey, look at fur. And oh, it was beautiful. Now y'all get this picture. About that time they treed, we rushed down into the swamps, and there the dogs were, treed up the biggest sweet gum tree in all of Amid River swamps. It was huge. You couldn't reach around this tree. There wasn't a limb on it for a while. Way up there.
Wow.
Huge tree. And I looked around at John, and I said, John, I don't believe you can climb that tree. And it hurt John's feelings. He pooched his lips out. He got fighting mad. He said, there ain't a tree in all these swamps that I can't climb. And he got his brogan shoes off, and he eased up to that sweet gum tree, and he hung his toenails in that bark, and he got his fingernails in there, and he kept easing up the tree, working his way toward that bottom limb, and he finally got to it, and he started on up into this big tree. Knock him out, John. It won't be long. And John worked his way on up to the top of the tree, and whoo, what a big one. And he reached around in his overalls and got that sharp stick, and he drawed back, and he punched the coon, but it wasn't a coon. It was a lynx. We call them souped-up wildcats in And that thing had great big tushes coming out of its mouth, and great big claws on the end of its feet. And people, that thing attacked John up in the top of that tree. Wow! You can hear John squall. What's the matter with John? I don't have no idea. What in the world's happening to John? Knock him out. This thing's killing me. The whole top of the tree was shaking. The dogs got to biting the bark of the tree and fighting one another underneath the tree. And I was kicking them like, you dogs, get away. What's the matter with John? Knock him out, John. Woo! This thing's killing me. And John knew that Mr. Barron toted a pistol in his belt to shoot snakes with. And he kept hollering, "Whoo, shoot this thing. Have mercy, this thing killing me. Shoot this thing." And Mr. Barron said, "John, I can't shoot up in there. I might hit you." John said, "Well, just shoot up in here amongst us. One of us got to have some relief."
And that's the coon hunting story. We used to listen to that when we was young. Knock him out, John.
The government is robbing you, and you're honestly dumb if you haven't caught on. You were supposed to get $6,400.
Oh God, why does it keep doing that?
last
Nobody
week.
fucking cares.
Explain
You're
what this is
lying,
about.
you stupid hoe. Like, shut up. You were warned.
You're worse when the camera's out.
Illuminated in
No,
this
you just don't pay attention to it when it's
bright,
not.
orangey white light. Now he looked at his watch and saw it was too early for sunrise, and so whatever this light was, it was not the sun. And so this fisherman leapt out of his bed, he ran upstairs to the top deck, and he looked out towards these lights. Now he looked aboard this fishing vessel. In the early morning hours of March 1st, 1954, a Japanese fisherman was asleep inside of his bed on board this fishing vessel, but suddenly he sat up because the room he was in was now completely illuminated with this unbelievably bright, orangey white light. Now he looked at his watch and saw it was too early for sunrise, and so whatever this light was, it was not the sun. And so this fisherman leapt out of his bed, he ran upstairs to the top deck, and he looked out towards these lights in the sky, and then the lights just vanished. And so for a minute, this fisherman and the rest of the crew were kind of relieved because they're thinking, okay, this seemed bad, whatever it was, but it's gone now. However, they didn't know this yet, but those lights were just the beginning of a 2-week-long nightmare that would go down in history as the first time ever humans experienced this particular horrible, horrible thing. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the Strange Dark
Can you set it right here again?
story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week.
Okay.
So, if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button is fast asleep, secretly take their phone and change the language settings to Chowder-Tongo Mixtech. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
He looks different.
Okay, let's get
Love
into
weight.
today's story.
Yeah.
At around 1 a.m. on March 1st, 1950, a 20-year-old fisherman named Oishi Matashishi finally headed down to his bed on the lower deck of the fishing boat he worked on, which was called the Lucky Dragon No. 5. Oishi was totally exhausted. He and the other 22 crew members had been working practically around the clock, 18-hour days for the last 6 weeks, trying to catch tuna, but so far, this trip had really been a disaster. They've gotten stranded on sandbars, there have been these terrible storms that had nearly capsized the boat, and then also they had lost a lot of their fishing lines when they got snagged on coral reefs. And so, as a result, their tuna hauls so far had been devastatingly low. And Oishi and the rest of the crew were very aware of this. In fact, Oishi was very worried that he would not bring home enough money to support his family. Back when Oishi was 14 years old, his father, who had been the breadwinner for the family, had been crushed to death when he was repairing a ship. And so now Oishi had stepped into that patriarch role, taking care of his mother and his 5 other siblings. And so Oishi really needed a solid paycheck from this trip, and it wasn't looking like that was going to happen. And so Oishi staggered his way into a small room and he collapsed onto his bed. And as he lay there trying to sleep, he felt the ship gently rocking side to side. The ship, the Lucky Dragon No. 5, was anchored relatively close to the Marshall Islands, which is a strip of islands right about halfway between Hawaii and Australia. But what's unique about the Marshall Islands is they sit over these huge ancient underwater volcanoes. Now, these volcanoes are dormant, but the captain of the Lucky Dragon No. 5 was weary enough about getting too close to these dormant volcanoes and fear they might erupt, that he intentionally kept them about 80 miles or so away from the Marshall Islands. And so eventually, Oishi did drift off to sleep in his bunk. But 5 hours later, Oishi suddenly sat up, wide
was now completely flooded with this very bright yellowy light. And so Oishi, he's kind of confused. He felt like it was too early for sunrise, and he checked his watch, and he saw it was only 6:45 a.m. And so yes, it was too early for sunrise. Whatever this was not the sun. And then when he went to the little porthole window where all this light was coming in, he had to squint his eyes when he looked outside, and he couldn't tell where this light was really coming from, what it was, but he could clearly see it was coming from the west. The sun rises in the east, so really, whatever this light was not the sun. At the same time, the rest of Oishi's crewmates were in this room with him. They were also starting to wake up and kind of looking around, like, what's going on here? And then without even saying anything, all of them just rushed out of the room and ran upstairs to the top deck to look around and see what was going on. And when they got up there, Oishi looked out towards the west where these lights were up in the sky, and he couldn't really see a clear point of origin. It wasn't like there was an obvious thing creating these lights. It was more like the western sky. It was just unbelievably bright and yellow and orange, and it seemed like the light was kind of hovering over where the Marshall Islands would be. And so everyone's thinking, is it possible this is a volcano eruption? Is there something else going on here? And then as the crew is just watching stunned silence of all these crazy lights in the sky, the lights kind of begin to fade and they turn blue and purple, and then they just went away. The entire crew was pitched back into darkness. As everyone's just standing around having no idea what to make of these lights, the oldest crew member on board was 40 years old. He said the one thing that everybody kind of in the back of their mind was thinking about but didn't want to say. The oldest crew member just said, atomic bomb. Just 9 years earlier, the United States had dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end World War II. Now, Oishi, who was Japanese, he was 11 years old at the time this happened, and it had a profound impact on his life, and his family's lives, his friends, anybody who was alive when this happened. It changed everything. But as Oishi and the rest of his crew were kind of staring out to the west, which was all dark at this point, Oishi thought, there's no way this could have been an atomic bomb. Number one, World War II is over, so there's no reason a bomb would get dropped again. And two, when those atomic bombs were dropped on Japan 9 years earlier, it vaporized basically everything and everyone in its path. And so for them to be this close to these huge lights, if that were an atomic bomb, wouldn't they too be vaporized? Like, they would not be able to see that and live. And so Oishi began to tell himself, okay, it probably was not a volcano eruption, it probably was not an atomic bomb, I don't know what it was, but we're okay. And while many of the other people on board the ship felt the same way Oishi did, very quickly the call came out amongst the crew to just go ahead and bring in the lines right now. We don't know what these lights were, but we need to head back to port, back in Yaesu, Japan.
The government is robbing you, and you're honestly dumb if you haven't caught on. You were supposed to get $6,400.
And so quickly, Oishi and the rest of the crew got to work pulling these lines in and prepping the boat to head back to port.
Commercials
and then
like
at some
that.
point
That
after
bucket
Oishi
is
had
just
done what he was
wide.
supposed to do, he began walking his way down below to the galley.
Right.
But when Oishi was about halfway, he suddenly heard this deafening explosion outside coming from the west where these lights had been. And immediately Oishi just jumped onto the ground, covering his head, thinking that was going to protect him. And as he's laying there listening to this unbelievable exploding sound, he's thinking, oh my gosh, one of those volcanoes under the Marshall Islands has indeed erupted. That's what's happening. And any minute now, a giant tsunami wave from this eruption is going to flip us over. We're going to get killed here. And so Oishi, as this massive exploding sound is going on, he jumps to his feet, he runs upstairs, and he finds the majority of the crew that was still up there had jumped to the ground. And they were just kind of protecting. A couple braver crew members had stood up and were kind of looking out towards the west to see if they could see what was going on. But there were no lights now. It was just these crazy loud exploding sounds coming from the west. And then suddenly all the sound stopped, and Oishi and the crew at that point braced for what they believed was this inevitable tsunami wave that was going to hit them. But the weird thing is after the exploding sound stopped, everything was totally calm. In fact, Oishi glanced over the edge of the boat and saw the water was totally placid, more calm than normal. And after a few more minutes went by and no massive tsunami wiped them all out, the crew was like, what's going on here? Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring Back Again. However, and over time, to a therapist, because I was really struggling. Now, therapy is not viewed online. And then it's betterhelp.com/. And so as Oishi and the rest of the terrified crew on deck began exchanging wild theories about what these lights and these sounds could have been, ranging from, again, the volcano, or maybe an atomic bomb, or some said maybe an asteroid hit the Earth. And as they're doing that, the ship captain called out again, hey, finish pulling in the lines. We need to get out of here right now. We don't know what that was. We don't know what's coming next. We gotta go. Now, for reference, pulling in these lines was not as simple as it sounded. It was kind of a long and complicated process. And so Oishi and the rest of the crew, they began doing their best to pull these lines in as quickly as they could. But when the sun finally rose in the east, the crew on board the Lucky Dragon number 5, as they looked out towards the west, towards the Marshall Islands, they began to notice these weird clouds forming over these islands. And as the crew began to talk about these strange looking clouds, they noticed that despite the wind blowing from east to west, these clouds, these weird clouds over the islands, were actually making their way towards them. Basically, they were moving against the wind, which made no sense. And so as these clouds got closer and closer, the ship captain was screaming at Oishi and the others to hurry up, get these lines in, we gotta go, we don't want to wait for this cloud. But it just was taking so long to pull in these lines, and before long, these weird gray clouds had moved directly over them and blocked out the sun. It was like it was nighttime all over again. And as soon as these clouds were right above them, Oishi and the others, they just stopped and looked up. And suddenly, it started to rain. Except not normal rain. It was like this weird milky substance, like gray milky color, and it was also hot. And so Oishi put his hands out, he cupped all this weird liquid in his hands, and nobody knew what it was. And then before long, the rain turned into sleet, still kind of gray and milky, and then the sleet turned into what looked like snow. And so Oishi and the others, they had their hands out still, and they were catching these weird snowflakes, but they didn't melt in their hands. They just kind of cooled on their hand and just sat there. Now, Oishi and the others were definitely unsettled by the snow, and frankly by everything that had happened that morning. They really did not understand what was going on, but there was something kind of incredible about this weird substance that was coming out of the sky, to the point where many of the fishermen on board grabbed bags and saved some of this weird mushy snow stuff to bring back home, to maybe show their families and friends, or even to give to science to see if maybe they could study it and see what it was. And so after Oishi and the rest of the crew had kind of gotten over the novelty of this weird snow coming out of the sky, they just got right back to work pulling in these lines. And the whole time, remember, they're getting dumped on by this weird stuff that's not melting. It's building up on the deck to the point where they have to stop what they're doing and shovel this stuff off the deck just to continue pulling in the lines. And for hours and hours they did that, just under this weird snowstorm. And then finally, right around noon, all the lines had been pulled in, and the ship's captain turned the wheel, and they began heading towards port. The next morning, Oishi woke up inside of his bunk on board the Lucky Dragon number 5. It would take several days to make it all the way back to port. And when Oishi woke up, he was suddenly struck with this intense nausea. And so he got up and stumbled his way into the bathroom, and just kind of out of instinct, he grabbed his toothbrush and began brushing his teeth. And as he did this, he had this weird feeling that his teeth felt like they were loose, that if he brushed too hard with his toothbrush, that he could knock his teeth clear out of his jaw. Then, when Oishi spit into the sink, he saw there was all this blood. And so Oishi began to panic, and he opened up his mouth, and he stared in the mirror to see if maybe he had lost some teeth, but his teeth looked okay. But again, it just, everything felt wrong, and he felt so sick. And so Oishi, he left the bathroom and went upstairs to the top deck. And when he got up there, he saw many other members of the crew looked terrible. Their skin was a weird gray color, and some of them had blisters all over their skin. And so to Oishi, the other crew members, it now seemed kind of obvious that whatever was coming out of the sky, that weird milky substance and that weird snow that didn't melt, clearly it must be toxic in some way, or maybe it's led to some horrible allergic reaction. And so Oishi and the others began referring to the stuff that came out of the sky as death ash. And the fishermen who had gathered up a lot of this death ash into bags to bring back home were now too scared to even touch the bags. Like, they wanted to take the bags and dump the contents overboard, but the fear of interacting with that weird death ash was too much. And so there were these bags kind of draped all over the ship that nobody went near that contained this stuff. And over the next few days that the Lucky Dragon number 5 continued its journey towards port, Oishi and the rest of the crew members continued to get sicker and sicker. In fact, on one day, Oishi was outside unfurling one of the sails, and as he was hoisting this rope, he noticed the rope was covered in blood. And then when he looked at his hands, he realized it was because his hands were basically disintegrating as he was touching rope, like his skin was just falling apart.
Yeah.
And then in addition to his skin falling off, Oishi's hair began falling out in huge clumps. And he was not alone. Many of the other crew members on board the Lucky Dragon number 5 had the same things going on. It was like everybody was just totally deteriorating, and they all knew it had to be connected to whatever the heck they had heard and seen when there was that explosion and the lights and the stuff raining out of the sky. They didn't know what it was, but it could not be a coincidence. That happened, and now this was happening to them. And so finally, on March 14th, the crew of the Lucky Dragon number 5 pulled into port in Yaizu, Japan, and as they got off, they made this interesting decision to not tell anyone what happened to them. They all had this fear that, if it got out, that people knew what happened to them, that somehow they'd get in trouble. And so they all decided they would treat whatever was happening to them, but they would do it kind of secretly. And so Oishi, as soon as he left the boat, he went straight to the doctor's office, and as best as he could, he tried to kind of discreetly tell the doctor what had happened during this fishing trip. And then he showed the doctor all these lesions on his skin and the bald spots, and the fact that he was so sick, and that his teeth felt loose. And the doctor's like, I got no idea what's wrong with you. And so all he did was prescribe Oishi some zinc ointment to put on all of these blisters and lesions on his skin. And he told Oishi that, this should work, it should clear everything up, and you should be okay, but, come back if this ointment doesn't work.
Here's one thing you need to do before buying anything online. Don't spend another dime on Amazon until you watch.
A few hours later, a woman was inside of her home in the port city of Yaizu, right near where the Lucky Dragon number 5 had docked, when she heard a knock on her front door. And so she put her broom up against the wall, she walked to the front door, she opened it up, and standing right outside was this horrible looking man who had gray skin and lesions all over him and all these bald spots, and he was smiling, and his teeth were all red, like there was blood all over his teeth. And for a second, she thought about slamming the door, but then she looked more closely and she realized it was her neighbor, Oishi. As soon as she realized this, she said, Oishi, what happened to you? And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders like he didn't have a way to explain all of this. And then he held out a small gray package and he just said, here's some extra fish that we caught on the last fishing trip I was on. I just wanted to give it to you. And the woman, who was still totally caught off guard by how terrible Oishi looked, she just turned and pointed at her kitchen table, telling Oishi to put the fish on the table. And so Oishi came inside and limped his way into the kitchen and put the package down. And then when he turned to leave, the woman stopped him and she said, Oishi, tell me what's going on here. You look horrible. You have all these bloody bandages on you. Was there a fire on the boat? Was there some sort of accident? Tell me. And so Oishi, he looked down for a second and then he looked back at her and said, I'm sorry, I can't tell you. Because again, remember, Oishi and the rest of the crew had decided they were not going to share details of what happened. And so this woman, who really liked Oishi and wanted to make sure he was okay, she just said, okay, you don't got to tell me about it, but here, have a seat, we'll catch up about other things. And so Oishi, he nodded and took a seat inside the living room, and as he sat there, the woman went into the kitchen and she got a cup of water, he brought it back and she handed it to him, and Oishi, he took the cup with a trembling hand, and he sat there drinking his water, just looking so terrible, and the woman, she really didn't know what to say. She did not understand at all what was happening. But she could tell, Oishi does not want to talk about it. And so to kind of break up the silence, she just began talking about stuff she had heard on the news. And the big news story that everybody was talking about was the science experiment that was done out near the Marshall Islands. And when this woman talked about a science experiment and the Marshall Islands, Oishi dropped his glass and shattered on the ground, and he just stared at this woman with a look of absolute terror on his face. And at this point, Oishi decided he was not going to keep his story secret anymore, and so he told his neighbor what had happened out on the water, the explosions, the lights, the rain, the snow, all of it. And after he did, the woman became terrified and said, get out of my house, go, go, go. And so Oishi, he got up and he kind of ran out of the house, not really sure what was going on. And then the woman, after Oishi was gone, she turned and she realized the package of fish that Oishi had left was sitting inside of her kitchen. And so she screamed and she too ran out the door. over the next few days, more and more of the fishermen from the Lucky Dragon number 5 began to talk about what had happened out on the water. And as those stories began to circulate, they began to make the news all over the world. And as this happened, fish markets all over Japan had to shut down and destroy thousands and thousands of pounds of fish in fear that it might have come from the Lucky Dragon number 5. And the reason why everybody was so scared of coming in contact with anything that had been on board the Lucky Dragon, whether it was the fish or the people, is because on March 1st, 1954, when Oishi was suddenly woken up by the bright light outside coming from the west, and then there was that loud and then out in the rain and the snow, all of that was not a volcano, it was not an atomic bomb, it was not a meteorite, it was not a fire, it was that science experiment that was talked about on the news. The US military was testing a brand new weapon that is quite possibly the most lethal weapon ever made. It's called a hydrogen bomb. And for reference, hydrogen bombs are 1,000 times more powerful than atomic bombs. Now, they detonated this hydrogen bomb far away from all of civilization. However, the Lucky Dragon number 5 was just close enough to this explosion that the crew on board the ship became the first humans in history to experience something called fallout, which is when deadly radioactive particles from this explosion get thrown up into the sky from the blast, and then they rain down on you like snow. That weird material they were feeling that they called death ash, that's the fallout. It's all radioactive. And in fact, the actual material itself that was raining down on them was coral reefs. They had basically been liquefied from this hydrogen blast. They got shot up into the sky, and then that's what fell down on them. That's why it wasn't melting. It was coral reefs. And so the reason Oishi and the rest of the crew got so sick and their skin began falling off and their hair began falling off was because of their contact with this fallout, this death ash. And so once they began sharing their story of what happened out there and it became news, the crew of the Lucky Dragon was rounded up and sent to a special medical facility where they were quarantined, and unbelievably, only one of them died. He was the oldest crew member who had brought up that maybe the lights they had just seen was an atomic bomb. But even though the rest of the crew survived, they would spend the rest of their lives battling strange diseases and cancers, and many of them would become sterilized, and those that weren't, their children often had birth defects. As for Oishi, he gave up being a fisherman and instead became a dry cleaner, but wound up spending the bulk of the rest of his life anti-bomb advocate and author until his death in 2021, when he would pass away at the age of 87. In the winter of 2001, inside of a Southern California police department, a fax machine in the corner of the room suddenly came to life. A moment later...
It's stupid and irresponsible not to claim the free $6,400 subsidy from the government. Let me explain. So they just
I don't know why it's doing that.
You want to do a free trial
later,
on YouTube
a few pieces
Premium?
of paper fell out of the machine. Today, we're going to look at 3 stories that sound totally made up, but they are all actually true. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, the next time you're over the Like Button's house, sneak into their closet and replace all of their shoe insoles with pudding skins. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the morning of December 21st, 1980, a woman in her 40s walked into a jail cell in Los Angeles, California. Now, in this jail cell already was another inmate. Her name was Etta Louise Smith. She was 32 years old, and at the time, she was laying on one of the benches inside of this cell. Etta had actually been in jail for 4 days leading up to this moment. The police were sure Etta had something to do with the savage murder of a nurse in the area, but they really didn't understand what role she had played. In fact, virtually everything about Etta was very confusing to police. And Etta herself was not really doing herself any favors because she wasn't really explaining she had the information information that she had. Now, Etta had already gone through a 10-hour-long interrogation, which led police nowhere. She had undergone a polygraph test, which didn't lead to any new answers, and she had also undergone a thorough strip search. She had been kept without food for 24 hours at one point. She had been left in this cold jail cell without shoes for 4 days. But she just wouldn't crack. She would not confess to playing a role in this murder. And so this was why police on this day had decided to go another route to get information out of Etta. That woman in her 40s who had just walked into Etta's jail cell was pretending to be an inmate, but in reality, she was an undercover cop. And her job was to go into this jail cell, befriend Etta in her trust, and see if maybe then Etta would begin revealing information about what she had done. And so after this undercover cop walked into the jail cell, the jailer shut the door behind them, closing in the undercover cop and Etta. And at this point, Etta was woken up. She was immediately struck by Etta's appearance. Etta did not look like her. She was this little, slight, totally unthreatening person who really just looked like a suburban mom who maybe had a white-collar job. But the undercover cop also knew that appearing to be totally harmless was a great cover for being a murderer, and so this could all totally be an act. And also, to this undercover cop, it just seemed like Etta was way too calm and collected, given her circumstances. She is effectively wanted for murder, and the police are putting so much pressure on her to get her to speak about it, and she's just laying down sleeping in her cell, making no big deal about it. But the undercover cop maintained a very neutral persona, and she sat down, and at some point she asked Etta, hey, what are you in here for? And Etta, she kind of just looked down and smiled for a second, and then when she looked back up at the undercover cop, she said, you're never going to believe me. The undercover cop at this said, oh, come on, how bad could it be? Tell me what's going on here. Why are you in here? And it was at this point that Etta would say something that nearly caused the cop to break character. Because Etta, she would say, well, I'm pretty sure this is going to be a movie. Now, the undercover police officer tried to be as neutral as possible as she's hearing this, but in her mind, she's like, okay, well, I clearly just discovered Etta's motive for being involved in this murder. Etta wants to be famous. She wants this made into a movie where she's the star. At the same time this conversation was happening, in an office within the jailhouse, a police captain was listening in on the conversation between Etta and this undercover cop. And when he listened to Etta talk about wanting to turn her story into a movie, he just shook his head in disgust, because Etta had just brought police to the location of the body of 31-year-old Melanie Uribe, a local nurse who was robbed and savagely beaten to death and then dumped in a canyon behind a bush. And now here Etta was talking about how she could get publicity around this terrible, horrible crime. It just did not sit right with the captain. And so as the captain was sitting there kind of watching this conversation transpire between the undercover cop and Etta, the captain was beginning to form a theory of what actually happened to Melanie Uribe and how Etta played a role in her murder. His theory went like this. 6 days earlier, the victim, Melanie Uribe, had left for her shift at the hospital in Burbank, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, but she had never arrived for her shift. And so when her colleagues had noticed her absence, eventually the police were called and a search was launched to find her. But after 48 hours, the police had not found Melanie, and there were no signs as to what happened to her. She had just vanished. And it was at that point, 2 days after Melanie had gone missing, that Etta just showed up at the police station and said she knew where Melanie was. And so the detective who was talking to Etta at the time when she came in and said this, he brought out a map and he said, okay, point to where she is. And Etta had immediately pointed to this area on the map called Lopez Canyon, which was about 25 miles away from Los Angeles. And she would tell the detective that, yeah, Melanie is somewhere right in there. When the detective asked Etta, how do you know this? Etta would say she just knew. And then when the detective followed up and said, Etta, this is pretty incriminating that you're telling me you know where someone's body is. What's motivating you to come and say this to me? And Etta would say that her conscience was weighing on her terribly, and she just had to go to police. Now, the detective who talked to Etta when she first came into the police station really didn't know what to make of Etta because she looked so unthreatening, and what she was saying, she was saying with a lot of confidence, and it seemed like she was really eager to help the investigation versus just clearing her conscience, which is kind of what she said she was doing. And when the detective looked into who Etta was, he discovered that she had a great job. She worked at an aerospace company in Burbank, California, and she even had governmental clearance. And so this woman clearly has been vetted by the government and by high-level companies, and she's passed the tests. But at the same time, the detective knew there was no good reason for why Etta would have this information, the location of a dead body. I mean, either she's just wrong and there is no body there, or if the body's there, the most likely scenario is that Etta was involved in killing this person or disposing of their body, or maybe both. So the detective said to Etta, hey, come back tomorrow and we'll take a police helicopter, we'll fly out over that canyon, and we'll see if we can find Melanie's body together. And so Etta said, okay, sounds good. She turned and she left. But then just an hour later, Etta came back into the police station with her 2 young kids in the car, and she would tell that detective that she actually just drove out with her kids to that canyon and had found Melanie's body. In fact, she told the detective that her 7-year-old child, who was in the car right now, had been the one to actually find Melanie's body. The detective could not believe this woman, 1, had gone out by herself to do this, but 2, had brought along her kids as well. Like, what's going on with this person? But regardless of how weird this was, the detective immediately rounded up some backup, and with Etta's help, they went out to a particular spot in this canyon, and sure enough, when they got out there, right in the spot where Etta said it would be, was Melanie's badly beaten body. And so it was at this point that the police captain had grabbed Etta and said, you're under arrest, I'm putting you in a cell because there's no way you could have known about this unless you were somehow involved. The captain thought by putting Etta in jail for a couple of days, she'd get scared and start talking. But 4 days had gone by and Etta had not cracked. She had not given up anything beyond telling the undercover police officer that she thought her story that was kind of still developing would likely be turned into a movie. And so the captain really didn't know what to do because at this point, Etta had not actually committed a crime. It was not a crime to find a dead person's body and report it to the police. And there was no evidence that actually tied Etta to the murder. All the police had was the fact that Etta came to them and told them that she knew where they found the body. But that's all they had. But the police captain would catch a break on the 4th day because he would receive a phone call that would totally change everything about this case. It would turn out on December 17th, 1983, so the same day that Etta would go into the police station to report that she knew where Melanie Uribe's body was, well, on that day, Etta was at work listening to the radio and filing some paperwork. And as Etta listened to the radio, the local newscaster was talking about Melanie Uribe and how she was missing. And the newscaster talked about how police had found her truck and it was parked on this dead-end street, and that police were searching nearby residences to see if maybe they knew what happened to Melanie. But as of right now, there really was no new leads. They did not know where Melanie was. And it was right around this point that Etta's listening to the news about Melanie that Etta heard a voice in the room she was in. And the voice said very clearly to Etta, she's not in one of those houses. And Etta immediately, when she heard it, she turned around wondering who the heck was in here, who's talking to her, but there was nobody else in the room. And then it was like immediately there were these flashes of images in Etta's brain that she had no idea what they meant, but it was a succession of a dirt road and then a bush and then something white, a nurse's shoe. And Etta very clearly saw these 3 images. It was right then that Etta thought, oh my God, I know where Melanie Uribe is. And so she sat there wondering what to do, and then finally thought, I have to go to police, as crazy as this sounds. And so she hopped in the car and she drove to the police station and she said, I don't know how, but I do know Melanie Uribe is right there in that canyon. But when the police had said, come back tomorrow and we'll go out and look for her, Etta just couldn't wait. And so she had gone with her kids, driven out to the canyon that she had seen in her mind. And sure enough, when she got out there, she found the dirt road that she had seen, then she found the bush that she had seen, and then with the help of her kids, they found the white nurse's shoe, and it was right near Melanie's body. Which meant that voice that Etta heard and the vision she had all been real. The phone call that the police captain received on the 4th day that Etta was sitting in jail and talking to the undercover cop, the phone call that changed the whole case, well, the phone call was from another police officer saying they had just arrested 3 men who were caught bragging about beating and killing Melanie Uribe, and they had confessed and they were now being held in jail. And so clearly, Etta did not commit this murder, and so even though it made no sense that she just knew where this body was, the police had to release Etta the same day, so she was released, and then ultimately the 3 men who confessed to killing Melanie Uribe, they would be found guilty, and they would each be sentenced to life in prison. 6 years later, Etta would sue the police department, and she would win the lawsuit because the jury on that case absolutely believed that Etta really did have a psychic vision that led to the discovery of Melanie's body. Etta would never go on to make a movie about her story, and in fact, when she was asked later on about why she said that during her conversations with that undercover cop, Etta would clarify that she didn't say that she wanted to make a movie, but rather she said to the undercover cop something to the effect of, it feels like I'm living out a bad movie. So that was kind of misconstrued by police into her saying, I want to make a movie about this. She didn't and has never made a movie, and in no way has sought out any fame or recognition for what happened. Today's video was sponsored by SoFi. Shortly after I left the military in 2017, my family and I decided we wanted to move, and so we went house hunting and found one we wanted and moved to purchase it. A loan to buy this new house, and so we had to go through the time I was doing this incredible home mortgage loan options for military vets towards realizing their
I thought you said there was
financial
3 stories.
includes home requirement. So a veteran paid their rent or mortgage for 1 year. To enter, click Thank You SoFi, back to the store. The night.
Dang it.
If $6,400 for your rent, gas, and groceries didn't hit your bank account from the IRS last night,
November 7th, 1860,
No one likes
a
it.
51-year-old American politician walked inside of his modest 2-story home in Springfield, Illinois. This politician was totally exhausted, but he was also really happy because in his hand he had a telegram that confirmed he had won an election that he had worked so hard for and he wasn't sure he was going to get. And so earlier that night, this politician had been out basically partying and celebrating this huge victory. But now he was totally beat and ready for bed. Once the politician was inside his house, he picked up an oil lamp to light the way, and he walked through his house to his study, where he put the lamp down on his desk. He put the telegram saying he had won this election next to the lamp, and then the politician just collapsed into a sofa to fall asleep. But before he closed his eyes, this politician looked over at a mirror on the wall, and what he saw in the mirror made him gasp, and he sat upright and looked at it like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. In this mirror, this politician was seeing his own face reflected as it should be, but then next to it was another face, and it was not his. It kind of looked like him, but it actually looked more like a corpse, like a dead person was looking out at him from this mirror. And so the politician, he stood up and began walking over to the mirror to get a closer look, but as he got closer, the dead person's face disappeared, and all was left was his own reflection. And so he's like, okay, I must have been dreaming that, that can't have been real. And so feeling very unsettled, this politician just went back over to the couch and he laid back down thinking, okay, just forget about that, go to sleep. But again, he glanced over at the mirror, and now that he was laying down again, he saw the two faces again, his own and this dead person's face. And at this point, he stood up and rushed out of the room into his bedroom where his wife was. Now, his wife was a very devoted
Although it doesn't look like it. Is it just because we're in the valley?
Thought maybe he could tell her about what he saw in the mirror, and she could interpret it and tell him what it meant. And so he sat down and he told his wife about what he had just seen, and she would sit there for a minute pondering what her husband had just said, and then her expression on her face just totally changed. She went from intrigued to very upset. In a quivering voice, she would tell her husband that what this meant was he would serve honorably in the office that he had just been elected to for 1 term, he would get re-elected, but he would not survive the 2nd term. Now, when the politician heard this, he immediately rejected it. And he said to his wife, there's no way that's true. I probably didn't even see a face in the mirror. I'm probably just so tired, I imagined what I saw. So let's just forget about it. But his wife was not consoled, and she fell into his arms sobbing as if he had just been diagnosed with some fatal